MSF South Africa. And we also have the executive director of Sothema, which is a pharmaceutical plant in Morocco that has been producing the China's COVID-19 vaccine, which is a Sinopharm vaccine. And we'll be hearing that presentation from Mehdi Zaghlou, who will be giving us a presentation shortly. You can carry on, Mr. Zaghlou.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Really glad and honored to be to join this this webinar. And it was really a good news when I heard from MSF team that they want to know more about Morocco and Sothema. And I will share with you. In fact, I will share with you a presentation. However, I have an issue because it is blocked. I want to share with you the presentation. If technically you can allow me to share my screen, it will be nice. I have a short presentation of a couple of slides for the whole patient in Morocco and also the closest country, neighbor countries in Africa. And we started at Sothema by the most difficult, when everybody was producing pills. Sothema started through a partnership with Eli Lilly, producing insulins. And till now, and we are the only producer for insulins in Morocco. And we have our own insulins, and we also manufacture Eli Lilly insulins. This is very important because I will tell you why it is important, because syringes and injectables are core in our whole story and the journey all over the last years. So in terms of organization, we have Mrs. Lamia Tazi, who is our CEO, daughter of the founder of Martazi. She is leading the company for the last 10 years with 22 years of experience, mainly at industrial and quality level. She's pharmacist by education. We have in the board, in the COMEX, the executive board, Mrs. Rizlan Khanboubi, who is leading the industrial part with a huge team in R&D and also quality regulatory for Morocco and the international affairs. Mr. Tazi is leading the whole support, and myself as operation executive director. Before that, and what is interesting, I started my journey in pharma. I'm doctor by education, and I started in vaccines 22 years ago in Lyon, France, with Pasteur Mérieux, MSD. And my boss at this time was one, I don't know if you know him, Pascal Bess, who was one of the founders of MSF. So this is just for the short story and why it is also very emotional for me to be a part of this presentation. So our presence in the region, we are more than 1,300 employees in Sothema. We have more than 355 marketed products. We built the whole configuration of Sothema was built around pharmaceutical licensing partners, and we will see that we have the top companies producing in Sothema for Morocco, for also Africa, and sometimes also for Europe and the Middle East, and we will see it later. We have a huge field team on the field in Morocco, Middle East, and Western Africa. We have a very strong regulatory and development team. We have also medical team. in charge of clinical studies, and we are the first actor in the region in terms of clinical study. And this is also very interesting. I will tell you also why in the coming slides. Let's look at the history of Sothema. As I told you, founded in 76, first big partnership and building of the huge plant in Morocco based mainly on insulin production. Then we signed several partnership with well-known companies. In 2009, we acquired Novartis plants. There was a huge disinvestment of Novartis all over 70 countries, and we, as a partner, we bought from Novartis the plant, and we ensured the continuity of the business by spreading their product, producing, distributing their product from this period till now. In 2012, there was also a very important date, because we were the first company, Moroccan company, the Moroccan company, building and implementing a plant out of Morocco, and it was in Senegal. West African Pharma, till now, we had some difficulties at the beginning, but for the last 4 years now, we started by packaging, and now we started from this year, and we will speed up the process in 22. We will start producing for ourselves, but also for some European companies who wants to start their business in Africa. So this is also, we are very proud of that. In 13, we signed a huge contract with BioCAD, and we started producing in 16 the first biosimilars, and we will see it also later. It was a huge step in access in Morocco. As you know, Morocco, as all African countries, we have a lot of out-of-pocket, and the insurance is not as effective as it's supposed to be. And thanks to democratization of biosimilars, we increased the coverage for cancer from 30% to 80% of Moroccan patients. In 19, we opened a big and huge plant for serums, and in 20, we started thanks to the medical team and the medical direction, we started a huge clinical study for Sinopharm, including 600 patients. And in end of November, we will close the study, and we will start the first to communicate on first results regarding this huge study on COVID-19. After that, today, as you know, we will have in the coming weeks the first batches released and produced in Morocco for Sinopharm vaccine for the Moroccan market and African market. Our footprint in the region, as you can see here, we are more focused on naturally on Africa, but in the, let's say, the French speaking Africa, but also in MENA, and we are the only Moroccan company with product registered, accepted in a lot of MENA countries like Kuwait, Saudi, Emirates, also Jordan, Lebanon, but also in our neighbor region, like for example Tunisia, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, and other Cameroon also, where we are present by our own teams. West Africa Pharma, Senegal. As I told you, we started with more with the packaging process, and it is the natural way of implementing our presence as a pharma company. There is a learning curve that we maintained, and now we are proud to have the first batches which will be released in Senegal, fully produced in Senegal, starting from 22. The main points. We are the first and unique company listed, and this is also very important to share because there is a full transparency at each level, from the finance part, but also from the whole process part. We are audited by our locally, by the finance institution, but also by our partners. We have a very strong growth in Africa and Middle East. We had our first biosimilar plant in Africa even before South Africa, which is something exceptional regarding the weight of South Africa and how they are leading pharma in the region. We lead a lot of clinical studies, mainly in biosimilars, in a very close collaboration with the university hospitals. We have also a strong presence in public tenders in Africa, in the whole African countries, and in Morocco, obviously. And as I told you, for the biosimilars, we spreaded and increased the access for a lot of diseases, mainly cancers and inflammatory diseases for Moroccan, and we started also now in Senegal and Cote d'Ivoire in 21, and we expect to expand the coverage and access in these countries. We have,
Mr. Mehdi, I'd
yes,
like to cut you short a bit. Your presentation is really nice, but because you're looking at COVID-19 manufacturing of COVID-19 vaccines, you'll be able to tell us how many vaccines you've been able to produce since the time the deal was signed in July, and what challenges has the company faced in terms of producing the COVID-19 vaccine?
Okay. In fact, we will produce 5,000 doses per month at the beginning, and we already started. And we will increase gradually the production to reach 15,000 doses per month. And then in the second year, we will produce 5 million doses per month. This is the plan. So our main challenges was as you can guess, the tech transfer, but it was easiest than expected because we have a very strong expertise in insulin production, and I discovered that the process of production of insulin production is somehow close to insulin production, and we had the whole facilities and the whole standards and the SOPs was implemented before, and if we add also our experience in biosimilars, this helped. These 2 points helped us a lot to speed up the process of tech transfer. We had Chinese team sitting with us a couple of months with us. We started 3 months ago with what we call water batches, for the whole process and to train on the process and to assess each step in the process, and we successfully did it, and it was validated by the Chinese, but also by the Moroccan Ministry of Health. And now we started some pilot batches with successful batches after analysis of the batches, and we are sure that in the first week of December we will deliver the first batches to the Ministry of Health to release it in Morocco and out of Morocco. Did it answer your question, Rada?
Yes, you've answered the question. And right now I'd like to rope in the other panelists, because you've mentioned one of the challenges that pharmaceutical companies, not only in Morocco or countries up north, are facing to be able to produce COVID-19 vaccines. And I'll ask Dr. Nikei Stembe from the Africa CDC the first question. The answer does lie in local production of COVID-19 vaccines, seeing that African countries have been relying on organizations or institutions such as COVAX and the Africa Vaccine Acquisition Trust to acquire COVID-19 vaccines. Why is it so important for countries to be able to get these technologies to be able to produce COVID-19 vaccines?
First, thank you so much for the great presentation by Dr. Mehdi, and also really I'm delighted to be here, privileged to be on the same panel with my sister, Prof. Pietro Terglash. So we share the common vision. And I think, yeah, correct. I mean, we all know the statistics are out there. I think we have seen it from the African Union, and I'm sure also panelists here will confirm 99% close to of the vaccines on the continent have been produced locally. Only 1% produced locally. So that's already a number. That figure gives you an idea of how really the vaccine manufacturing ecosystem it's really lagging behind on the continent. And then people like Pietro Sothema that just presented now are just going to be part of that exercise to be sure that we reverse engineer it so that by 2040, that's our target, we at least produce 60%. How do we do that? I think you've just highlighted one of those, IP tech transfer. That's one. We also aim through what we call the partnerships for African vaccine manufacturing to provide really an enabling environment to all that are really interested or kind of appetite to do that vaccine manufacturing ecosystem to really go into, and so we can minimize the risk because this is a new we all envision to move into. The scientists and then also those financiers that we really want to put in resources in. I want to see that as a viable business. I think we all know the concept around the economies of scale. So there are issues around regulatory, just to add on that we mentioned, the issues close to financing. There's one thing that we haven't talked about, the demand certainty. When we move towards that tech transfer, training, building capacity, what Prof. Pietro is going to be doing for the rest of the continent for that mRNA tech transfer in Cape Town, which I had the privilege to visit, then we're going to start thinking, when we now improve or increase our production lines, where are we going to get this product sold? And that's it, the biggest question. And then we have over 17 member states that have expressed an interest. And then we look at the demand on the continent, the market landscape, that has to be shaped to be sure that we don't create those or have those vaccine manufacturing plants that will not be sustainable after COVID, or at least after the acute phase of COVID-19. I is quite critical that we look into that, and we're looking at that closely. And I think we're working to, I'm just going to announce it in the next coming days. Pietro, the team here, we're definitely going to meet somewhere in Africa to discuss how do we streamline this. It's not really just having those conversations in closed doors, now openly with the leaders on the continent, face to face, and really make a decision on the way forward. So just to summarize, demand, certainty. If we produce part of the economies of scale, where are we planning to get those products? Is it for local consumption or beyond the continental need? Second, the regulatory that we need to be sure we strengthen. Then the financing, company access to finance. Do we have a vaccine fund where people who have a viable project, we can take a risk to fund those to be sure that we minimize the risk. Then issues around, we talked about it already, tech transfer and IP, and then also research, development, and talent that you highly pointed out, where from the South Africa mRNA and other hubs they'll probably plan to have established across the continent. I think that's my first reflection, and thanks. Back to you, Robert.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nikes. You've just mentioned the points that I wanted to touch on, which is looking at the tenets of vaccine production, from the production up to the demand side. Now, bringing Professor Petra right now. Afrogen is one of the labs that was, pharmaceutical companies rather, that was identified by the WHO to be able to develop or crack the code behind the Moderna vaccine. Have you been able to do that?
Rhoda, thank you very much. And the panelists, before I answer you, may I make a comment on the presentation we just had from Mehdi? I think Sothema brings us a blueprint of how to do this. What is very significant is that they have built on existing capacity. They redirected that capacity. The partnership with Sinopharm and the tech transfer, the fact that there were experts from Chinese companies sitting with Sothema, holding their hands to ensure that they fast-track that transfer. That is very critical success factors also for the mRNA hub that we're discussing here. So where are we at the moment? We have the hub established. We have started lab scale work with scientists, our partners at Wits University, who has 10 years of experience in working with RNA for therapeutic purposes, now redirecting that knowledge base with the Afrigen team, biotechnology team, to forward integrate. We are starting to work with the same sequence as the Moderna vaccine, and we forward integrate to make complete a full drug substance and drug product process. We have certain challenges associated with that, but very important for us is that we have to also look at bringing a vaccine to market, which is not only effective and safe, but also suitable in terms of access for Africa. So we are looking at formulations that will give us a more thermostable vaccine at the end of the day, that we do not have the cold chain challenges that we currently have with the mRNA vaccines. So it's an integrated approach here, working with partners and utilizing the competence and capabilities in Africa and the support of African CDC and African Union and our government and WHO MPP to reach a goal that in a year from now, we will produce clinical trial material of a vaccine which is non-inferior to the Moderna vaccine, but may have interesting thermostability qualities that makes it more suitable for the environments we focus on.
You just mentioned that it would take you a year to be able to come up with this vaccine. For the people who do not have a medical background and are listening into this webinar series, would you kindly explain in detail why it would take you a year, yet if you were to work with Moderna, it would have taken you a shorter time, just like what Dr. Mehdi said, because they had the Chinese people come in and show them how to produce the Sinopharm vaccine?
So there are some technical components of the production of an mRNA vaccine that we don't have. There is enormous public domain information, which we as a scientific team, which has the know-how, can utilize and apply. Our biggest challenge is around regulation, quality control, quality assured, standard operating procedures to ensure that we have regulatory approvals in the timelines that we've set for ourselves. If we had a turnkey tech transfer of support from one of the established mRNA vaccine producers, that would have really shortened our time, cost less money, and enable us to go to clinic much easier and much faster.
Thank you for that, putting that into clearer context. And now I'll bring in Elaine, who is a pharmacist with MSF, to shed more light on the secrecy behind the deals that are being making within the pharmaceutical companies. It's very important that behind what COVID-19 is teaching African countries is that these vaccines and treatment options can be produced much faster. But why is there so much secrecy in terms of how the vaccines or the treatments are being produced, and the people that are producing them are not given the option to be able to license them and produce them much faster like developing countries?
Yeah, thank you, Rhoda. Indeed, I mean, we've been now asking Pfizer and Moderna publicly for over 2 months to share the technology with the WHO hub. And what we've seen so far is that these two companies, despite the fact that they have many partnerships with many manufacturers. So if we take the example of Moderna, it's a company that is almost entirely depending on contract manufacturers to produce their vaccines. And we've seen some of these manufacturers. So I think a very interesting example is Rovi in Spain, which is a manufacturer that has never produced any vaccines before. It's a manufacturer that their business is based really on injectable medicines, right? So we've seen them integrating the technology in an existing facility, and they will start producing the first batches of drug substance 6 months only after they've signed the deal with Moderna. So this speaks to the timeline, right? A much shorter timeline and the possibility of integrating this technology in an existing facility as opposed to building a new facility. And what we've seen also is that instead of answering our calls and other NGOs' calls as well, what Moderna and BioNTech are doing is, they're going for bilateral deals and they're going for building their own facilities. That this is something that takes much longer time instead of working with existing partners. We've identified at least 7 companies on the African continent, and Sothema was one of them, that might not be vaccine manufacturers, but have the same kind of profile as the Spanish company that I've mentioned, so that potentially could integrate this technology. And the reason we think that Pfizer and Moderna are not willing to do so is obviously because they want to hold the control over the technology. The moment you transfer the technology to another partner, and obviously we've been asking for much more than contract manufacturing. A contract manufacturer, as we've seen, for instance, in the case of J&J and Aspen in South Africa, doesn't have any say on how the doses then are used, right? You just kind of fulfill your part of the deal, and then it's the originator company that decides. So we don't want this kind of deals. We want deals where there is a full tech transfer, there's a full license, and these companies are not interested in that because they don't want to lose control over their technologies. And instead, as I said, instead of answering our asks and also the ask of the WHO in kind of joining the hub and sharing their technology with the hub, they prefer these bilateral deals that unfortunately until now have been extremely lacking details. So we don't have any idea of the timelines, when this will happen. We've heard an announcement from BioNTech as well, involving Senegal and Rwanda. But again, all these deals are, they maintain the complete control of these companies over the technology. So we will keep asking, and I think there's also probably a possibility of going beyond these two companies, because we know that other companies, including the Global South, have their own candidate vaccines, some of which are very interesting, and they might be potentially more open to the idea of sharing their technology with the WHO hub. Thank you.
Dr. Mehdi, Alain just mentioned an interesting concept where he talked about how the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was being manufactured in South Africa. So if we look at the contract that you have signed with Sinopharm to be able to produce this vaccine, are you producing it under a license or under a contract?
In fact, it's more complex than that. We signed a contract with the Ministry of Health. In fact, the Moroccan Ministry of Health, and the Ministry of the government, the Moroccan government, signed a contract with Sinopharm. So we are manufacturers. In fact, we call it in French contrat tripartite. In fact, the contract is directly done between Sinopharm and the Ministry of Health, and we are producing for the government, for the Moroccan government, the vaccine. So it's quite complex, because at the end of the day, we will not commercialize the vaccine. We produce because it is distributed for free in the country, as all the countries. So the contract is directly done between the government and Sinopharm.
Dr. Case, the Africa CDC has a bird's eye view of what is happening around the continent in terms of vaccine production and vaccine acquisition. What do you make of these thoughts that are being raised by Professor Petro, Elaine, and Mehdi, of where these companies are getting the deals or assigning deals to be able to develop COVID-19 vaccines? But what is actually being done is something that is not tangible, because they still have to go through a lot of processes, and the tech transfer does take a long time, which means that African countries and Africans will have to wait longer to be able to produce COVID-19 vaccines.
And thanks, Rhoda. I think it's quite important, as I highlighted in my introductory remarks. I think that's exactly why we set up the partnerships for Africa vaccine manufacturing, to be able to support the vaccine manufacturers, play that stewardship at continental level, so as to ensure that we have a continental approach here, which is what we put together, and we are ready to launch it by the end of this month, the framework for action. So it's based on the experiences from the manufacturers, their challenges, the bottlenecks that we're trying to address, and address all those issues and provide solutions around the market design, the regulatory, access to finance, tech transfer, IP, which we're now discussing. That particular component, the AU issued a statement about the waivers, the TRIPS waivers, okay? So we knew that that's going to be an issue, not only for COVID-19, also for diagnostics and therapeutics. And we know that, again, Peter can definitely confirm, and also around the R&D capacity on the continent. It's quite important. And the infrastructure also coming to fall. So all those elements, we at Africa CDC, we're ensuring that we provide that solutions to support vaccine manufacturing ecosystem on the continent. So I think so far, Petro and team, we're fully supportive to what is happening currently at Afrigens and through the WHO, MPP, and the South African Medical Research Council. We're also engaging with different front runners, member states, that have expressed an interest that I mentioned earlier, to support their own vaccine manufacturing ecosystem. So that's quite important. We're reaching out to donors, the MasterCard Foundation, which we're trying to really identify key support around R&D and talent development, Team Europe as well, and other stakeholders, to really accelerate the process and be sure that we don't project ourselves to 2023, 2024. The sooner the better, but the only way to do that is to support infrastructures, to get it really fully operationalized, like the tech transfer hub in South Africa, which will serve as a model for the rest of the continent, in addition to the private sector, an initiative that we've just heard from the presentation. That the same applies to Vaxera. They also had to get the Chinese team sitting with them for 12 months to get the Sinovac, to crack it down in Egypt. I think the more, I think we all agree there's a multifaceted approach to this. If you don't get the technology from directly from the manufacturer, I think we have the best of the mind. We already have Petro there. She's working on cracking the code to be sure that we have something that is adaptable to our own environment. -20 storage is not practical for us. We really want to find a solution to that. I think that's the only best way to do that. We also want to facilitate and ensure that those that are going through that path get all what that will be required for them to achieve that and be successful. That is success for the continent. I think that's where we look at that, and we need to project ourselves, and it's doable. I just want to say that. Thank you, and back to you, Rhoda.
And just to go back to you, Petra, if we look at what Dr. Nikes just mentioned, again, the different tenets of vaccine production and basically just producing drugs for any other type of disease and not just COVID-19, how important is funding if we are to look at funding that African governments are putting towards research and development? If we look at different countries that have better economic stance, like Japan, Germany, they put in a lot of funding towards research and development. But what would you say about the African continent in terms of how they're putting in money towards this cause that can help in dealing with future pandemics, if at all we end up having one?
Rhoda, thank you. I'm going to answer your question in a minute. I just want to touch on what Nikes said earlier. And I think the important thing for us on this call and for the African continent representatives, what is important is alignment. And what we're starting to see in Africa is very, very clear alignment. And there's a Team Africa culture that's starting to develop, which is incredibly powerful. The second thing is there's a systems approach. Nikes mentioned a number of times the ecosystem. We are not singularly here look only at manufacturing. We look at a total system that can support the second objective, which is critical, and that comes through in all the strategies, and that's sustainability. A sustainability objective. And that answers the funding question. Our experience with the hub, after the expression of interest was awarded to the South African consortium to be the first hub for Africa, our concern initially was funding. How will we be able to access funding? And it was amazing how foundations, bilaterals, WHO, European companies came together for funding. But not only them, also Africa. The African Union, the MasterCard Foundation supporting skills development, a critical success factor for any manufacturing sector to be fully developed, and in a systems approach is skills. Not only R&D important, but technical, logistics, financial, marketing, the total ecosystem skills, and the funding that is coming from organizations such as MasterCard and other to support that is phenomenal. In the case of South Africa, direct funding from the South African government to enable us to establish this platform in as fast as possible process to be able to replicate that. Funding is not the problem we have now. I think down the line, when we have to start building additional capacity, create the spokes to the hub for the tech transfer, I think funding will have to be based on business cases. But if you look at the work that the Partners for African Vaccine Manufacturing has done, just in terms of market, we're talking about a market size of $20+ billion in Africa. We're talking about enabling access of local manufacturers to that market. So I believe that we are in complete position to have economies of scale, have different units of economics, and to be able to build sustainable businesses on the continent. And again, I think Sothema is an example of how this can be done. Aspen is an example of how it can be done. So I think down the line, we would be able to do bankable business plans for the rollout to ensure that it is sustainable.
Thanks, Professor Petra. And now we have a few questions coming in. There's one for Dr. Nikes Dembi. This is from Laura Lopez Gonzalez, and she asks, could Dr. Nikes Ndembe please restate how many member states expressed interest in producing mRNA vaccines, and what if anything is doing to get new producers ready as Africa works on reversing engineering? Dr. Nikes.
Yeah, sure. I think I've said it. I just want to be sure that I made it very clear. We're not putting all our eggs in one basket. And what I mean by that is we're not just looking at mRNA technology. We're looking at least 6 different, a kind of hybrid between innovative and the traditional vaccines, because we're not only looking at COVID-19, but what Petro and team are looking at, we are building that structure, that hubs for mRNA. We do not want to have mRNA hubs across the continent. So that's one that we would like to have specialized. So there are 17 countries, and then we're really encouraging those to really have a little bit diversify across the 6 platforms that we've identified, at least for the 22 diseases that were prioritized. And not all of them are going to go to, even just do fill finish or drug substance. So we really want to be sure that each of them will play a key role to support each other. That's the whole of Africa approach. So if you start having 5 mRNA hubs across the continent, that is not sustainable. It's not helping us. We're going to build capacity starting with what we have, moving forward, and ensure that that can be supporting those platforms in terms of production. But the rest, we're going to have, they're already existing, some of the front runners, including South Africa, Egypt, Senegal, and then we've seen Morocco, that are already working on different platforms. So we're just going to strengthen that, ensure that we have diversified our portfolio. I hope I've answered that question. Thanks. Back to you, Rhoda.
Thank you, Dr. Nikes. And we have a question for Dr. Petro, and this is from Elstorial. And he asks, are you envisaging a non-inferiority study comparing to Moderna in a head-to-head comparative trial? How will you get Moderna doses, and how will you measure vaccine efficacy based on reduction of symptomatic cases like original trials, or looking at antibody levels only?
Well, that's a big question. I think the short answer is it would not be ethical to do a clinical trial head-to-head to compare 2 vaccines. But what we're doing in preclinical studies, in vitro and in vivo, we are doing we will do comparisons, and we're busy developing the protocols for that. But in a clinical setting, that will not will happen. It will happen in preclinical setting. And there are specific endpoints that will be measured in that preclinical studies to ensure that we have the safety and efficacy profiles. I hope that answers the question.
It does. Thank you so much for clarifying that. And I'd just like to bring in Elaine for a second, because Dr. Nikes talked about the fill and finish process, which is what some African pharmaceutical companies have been able to do in producing COVID-19 vaccines. Now, if there's really any point of making African pharmaceutical companies be able to produce COVID-19 vaccines, why are we still relying on the point of fill and finish when they already have existing capacity to be able to do that? If we take example what Dr. Mehdi mentioned, that they were relying on existing capacity for insulin to be able to produce COVID-19 vaccine. The Institut Pasteur in Senegal, which has been producing the yellow fever vaccine, has the capacity to be able to do it. So why are these existing pharmaceutical companies in developed countries just only looking at African pharmaceutical companies from the point of doing the fill and finish process, and not giving the technology transfer that is needed to make it faster and easier to produce vaccines?
Yeah, thank you, Rhoda. And probably Dr. Zarloul is maybe a better place to answer some of these questions. But usually, when you do a tech transfer, it's a backward integration. You start by fill finishing, and then little by little you go up the process, and you get to drug substance. So, in itself, the fact of doing it this way is not, I think, is not that surprising. And as I've mentioned the example of Rovi, and this is what they did. The Spanish company Rovi started by fill finishing the Moderna vaccine before signing another agreement to produce the drug substance. So it does make sense, let's say, from a tech transfer perspective. The problem is that what we are not sure about is whether, for instance, the example of the deal that BioVac signed with Pfizer would at some point result in also tech transfer of drug substance manufacturer. We have no visibility of that, and neither does apparently BioVac itself. So that's I think something that needs to be discussed from the beginning, and we need to make sure that any fill finish deal is also including from the starting. And we've seen the example of that. So we've seen the example of, for instance, of the fill finish deal between AstraZeneca and Fiocruz in Brazil, where they started by fill finishing, but it was clearly mentioned in the initial agreement that at some point there will be a full tech transfer. So it's very important that these two figure there. The problem also that we have is obviously, as I said, because all classical manufacturing, vaccine manufacturing techniques are based on some kind of biological processes. There's very limited capacity on the African continent for that. We always hear the same companies coming up. Institut Pasteur Dakar. We hear about BioVac. There is some capacity bacteria in Egypt. But the interesting thing about mRNA is that you could actually produce mRNA in a facility that has never produced any vaccine and has no experience in biological processes. This is where it gets really interesting, and this is where we actually widen quite importantly the manufacturing base, because as I said, we've identified 7 companies on the African continent. If you go to other manufacturing countries, you think about India, then the base is even bigger, right? So when you have 7 companies, and as I said, Sothema is one of them, but we've also identified a company in Tunisia, in Egypt, in South Africa that could also do that now. The problem is that, obviously, as I said, this is not happening, and hopefully with the hub, these companies will be identified as spokes and will receive the technology from the hub. Then the problem that we have, obviously, is when you have to reverse engineer. The problem with the reverse engineering is that the timeline. You're moving from, as I said, the example of Rovi, where the timeline of the tech transfer was 6 months, to a timeline that becomes years, because you have to go all over the development process all over again, from preclinical until the end, with no help from the originator company. And that's a big problem, and it's a lot of missed opportunity, because with the help of the company, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, basically, and this is unfortunately not happening.
No, I think, let me comment. Rhoda, do you have? Can you allow me if you want?
Yes, please go right ahead, Dr. Nikes.
Yeah, I think that's where the power of having an institution like the African Union, and that's exactly what we're trying to do, such as to minimize that delay. And we're working closely. I just want to be just a little bit, just comment there, but I don't want to go too much into details. At least working with Pfizer and Moderna to be sure that we have those at least processes fully supported. And it's happening, and there are member states that are having high-level strategic meetings to ensure that the South Africa hubs get what really will be required to get this done on time. So I just wanted, because this question is coming up in terms of capacity. If you look at this slide, we have at least 17. Those are the 17 year. I had the privilege of at least to visit 5 of those, including Egypt. You have Senegal, South Africa, and then if you look into that, we haven't visited Morocco yet. And but see, at least those countries there, they have that capacity to do at least to establish drug substance, at least, or fill and finish, in addition to what we have in South Africa. This is another question that came up. I just wanted to flag it in terms of platform, where we're looking at. This is the extreme and high sophisticated, flexible that Peter and team are looking into. The mRNA, we have the viral vectors, all other platforms we're looking at technology, we're also looking into that closely. Bearing in our mind, I think the whole discussion, regardless of the platform, should be, do we have that market to be able to support those 22 diseases? That's probably the question that is of relevance here, regardless of the platform. Then the combination of our potential moving to 2040 is at the bottom. That third point, looking at fill and finish, is there, but we still have to meet the target if you want to be self-reliant. But 2040, it's going to be a combination of end-to-end, fill and finish, drug substance, and the R&D, and what we're all working now from the tech transfer trainings, getting people that the technology in the end is quite clear. But what we're seeing even is with the industry, and they are kept secret. How do we enable them to share in confidence with our partners, and even just the hubs that we've established collectively and we're supporting in SA? That's where the question is. So that's the most important. In my view, tech transfer is critical. IP is good. Without tech transfer, I'm not sure it's going to go that far. Thank you. Back to you, Robert.
Yeah, sorry, Rhoda, if I can just
No, go right ahead.
Huh? May I?
Go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you. In fact, just to clarify two things. Even for biosimilars, we started with there is just to say same things that was said by Alain. In fact, for our experience in biosimilars, we started by fill and finish. And today we have a plan with several steps. We will start in 2022, the end of 2022, as presented previously. We will start the whole mixture and culture by the end of 22. So there is a learning curve that you don't. I don't advise to speed up the process, because it's so sensitive and you need to learn. And in this learning curve, time is very important. For sure, we have to speed up, but we don't have to overgo certain steps. This is my advice. The second thing I just want to share with you that 8 years ago, Novartis at this time was also before selling their vaccine division to GSK. They approached Sothema to start meningitis vaccine production, and everything was done. Really, everything was done, and even the technical transfer was approved. And Novartis was okay to do it, but unfortunately the market was very low in Morocco, and the prices also were very low, because the Moroccan government was not able to help and to support financially the whole program, because they were supported by UNICEF at this time, and the vaccines provided by UNICEF was much lower in terms of price than the cost of good, in fact, of the vaccine produced locally. The mindset changed after COVID, but this was before COVID. The finance part was very important, and now the autonomy is more important than the finance part. This is also that I wanted to share. And the last point for me, for our continent, I guess we saw that there is a lot of country, they showed the interest. I think that we should diversify the number of partners, plants, and also type of vaccines that should produce, and not only COVID, because now we are focusing on COVID, but our continent is suffering from a lot of diseases. I think about meningitis. I think about some respiratory diseases for kids, for infants. These should be should be insured. I remember that in early 2010, there was a shortage of meningitis vaccines all over the world, and we were not able to vaccine our kids in Morocco, Algeria, and the whole Maghreb, and it was really frustrating for everyone. And as a doctor, to not be able to save lives, it's something dramatic. Because at this time, Novartis was obliged to supply US and rich countries. This is just to tell you that COVID, yes, for sure, it's very important for the time being. But if we project ourselves in the future, we will be facing a lot of virus, a lot of bacteria, and we need to ensure a minimum level of autonomy.
Yes, Petro, I see you've raised your hand.
Maybe just to link to this, very important. If we look at the strategy that the continent at the moment is putting together, it is certainly beyond COVID. The reality is that we use 25% of the world's vaccines, but we produce only 1% on this continent. What is important that Nikais also pointed out, it's not only mRNA platforms, there are multiple other platforms that we need to introduce if we want to really reach the target by 2040 to produce 60% of the vaccines required on this continent locally. The other point that you made in terms of bankability, it is important to create or reduce trade barriers between the different African countries so that we ensure that as a continent we build the marketplace and we reshape the marketplace.
And Dr. Nikais, just to touch on what Petro has said, if we look at the trade barriers that are already existing, and Sothema said that the company will be planning to produce about 5 billion doses of the Sinopharm vaccine. In the event that they would want to distribute it across the continent and not just the Maghreb region, how easy would it be for them to be able to move the product across the continent? Yet we all know that it's very hard to even move one banana from one country to the next because of the regulatory factors and the trade barriers that are in existence. Nikais, are you still there?
If I can answer
the line dropped a little bit, sorry.
Okay, that's fine, that's fine.
Can you just repeat the question, please? The line dropped.
Yes, I will. So Professor Petro and Dr. Bedi talked about one of the key issues that they'll be facing once they'll be able to produce vaccines will be, of course, distributing them across different African countries. And if Sothema, just like what Mehdi presented earlier in his presentation, if they'll be able to produce 5 billion doses of the vaccines and would want to circulated within the continent to reduce logistical cost, how will the Africa CDC be able to help to ensure that these vaccines will be easily distributed, because existing trade barriers make it hard for countries to be able to move products from one country to another, just like it's hard to move a banana from Nigeria, let's say, to Kenya, because of the existing regulatory challenges and the trade barriers? No,
good question. That's exactly the kind of thinking we'd like to see behind what we're currently doing, and it falls under our first pillar, which is around the market design and demand intelligence. So you all recall, as part of our response to COVID-19, we established what we call the African Medical Supply Platform. It's a pool procurement mechanism, and all the 55 member states have subscribed to that. And it's working perfectly for other commodities, at least diagnostics and therapeutics, and the same even for vaccines. Currently, the African Vaccine Acquisition Tax Team that you recall, we've secured over 400 million doses of the J&J, and at least 40 of the 55 member states are getting their own procurement through that platform. So there's a system in place to do pool procurement that can support the current market and support the vaccine manufacturer. But let me just put one or two critical, because that question, you put in 5 million, but we have one of the vaccine manufacturers, in fact, in Northern Africa, that's Vaxera. They're planning to produce over 2 million doses by 2022. And the major question there is where those at least product, if that's not from the Northern Africa region or Middle East, going to be definitely been. I mean, those are going to be buying those products. But the bottom line there is a limitation that we're aware of is the regulatory. Is the regulatory component. Is it PQ or WHO approved to be actually sold out of the country? Those are kind of, elements that we need to be sure that we have them in place. As we speak, all these countries, are there at least ML3 as we speak? Only 2 countries have achieved maturity level 3 in terms of NRAs and regulatory processes, even based on the site assessment. I think all those things we need to be sure so that the quality in the end won't be a problem in terms of ensuring that those products can be sold outside of Africa. Then to close on that, the Africa Trade Agreement is there. Member states have ratified it. And then I think that's going to be providing also a platform by at least 2022 to ensure that any goods probably from Morocco can be easily market in South Africa or South Africa to Morocco, vice versa. I think they are definitely an instrument within the African Union to be able to support that. But as I've said earlier, we really have to sit down and think carefully about our market design. That's my point. Thank you. Back to you, Rhoda.
Thank you, Dr. Nikes. And I have a question here that's directed to Elaine. And the question is, so Moderna, it's about the intellectual property. So Moderna said it wouldn't enforce the intellectual property in the pandemic, but they have filed 2 patents in South Africa. What's your take on that?
Yeah, thank you, Rhoda. Indeed, I mean, we know of 2 patents so far filed in South Africa, knowing that one of these 2 patents is extremely problematic because it's extremely broad and basically would cover any mRNA-based technology, be it a vaccine or a therapeutic. And it's a patent that, to our knowledge, has been rejected in many other countries and unfortunately granted in South Africa. What this means is that, when Professor Petros and her team are trying to reverse engineer the vaccine, whatever they might get in the end will potentially infringe this patent. And this actually is true, we think, even for the Pfizer vaccine that is currently registered and used in South Africa. The problem with the Moderna promise not to enforce is that it's time limited, right? It's limited to the pandemic time. So how long is the pandemic going to last? And what happens with the vaccine that will be ready in 3 years, for instance? Is the pandemic still going to be there in 3 years? And is Moderna still going to kind of respect its current commitment? And there are reasons to think that they might not. So it is highly problematic. Then it becomes highly problematic, both for what the hub is doing, but also any other mRNA-based technology in South Africa. So we have no solution for now for this, but it's something that we are obviously, us and other NGOs are following very closely, I think the WHO as well. And we need to find a solution to this problem, obviously. And this is, I mean, we have for now this visibility in South Africa, but we also think that patents related to the mRNA technology are being filed today by these companies almost everywhere in the world. So we might discover more and more patents in countries that are also trying to have their own vaccines. So we know of very interesting vaccine candidates, for instance, in India, in Thailand. And these countries, these developers might be facing the exact same challenges as well. So it's, I think, if anything, it really emphasizes that patents are actually a huge barrier when it comes to when you're trying to reverse engineer or to have your own technology, and that we need to find a solution for this problem.
Petro, I'll come to you. What's your take on that? Because I see you keep nodding, and it's what your team is trying to do. It's the reverse engineering. But if we could also try and also make the public understand that it's not your own doing, it's the situation that has presented itself and the pattern that is there, and it's making it hard for your team, and it will take a longer time for it to be able to crack the code.
So this is a very, very fundamental and important question, and Elaine has really addressed the problem we're facing. So in short, under the BOLR exemptions in the World Patent Acts and also in South Africa, we can develop a vaccine which is identical to the Moderna vaccine up to phase 3 clinical trials. The patents will prevent us from doing market authorization and then distribute these vaccines. So that would be a barrier. We're fully aware of that, and as Elaine is saying, there are numerous discussions in many forums to look at instruments to enable access to that IP through waivers and other tools. What is significant in the South African case is that people may not realize, but South Africa is a non-examining country. So patents filed in South Africa are not examined before they are awarded. And that's the case for many African countries. And again, the African Union and CDC are addressing and looking at policies that will prevent and enable that. What then happens is that South Africa awarded a patent which was rejected in many other territories. And as Elaine's saying, is so broad that it actually will prevent BioNTech, Pfizer to produce vaccines in South Africa. Any mRNA vaccine for therapeutic or vaccine purposes will be restricted. That's hugely problematic to public health challenges. So our team are working on public domain knowledge. We are working within the context of Moderna's pledge not to enforce infringement legislation, but also under the BOLR exemption. So we are working completely legally. We hope that in the next months, by the time we get to a vaccine, that we will resolve some of these issues. At the same time, we are also looking at key innovation points to modify and improve on the vaccine. But a broad claim, like Elaine was saying, is any vaccine containing RNA is problematic globally. And I think it will be addressed. We're working towards the WTO ministerial meetings in Washington at the end of this month, early December, and this will be a key subject for discussion on that forum.
Thank you, Petra. And for those who are listening in, it's very good that I remind you guys that South Africa and India are part of the two countries who supported the waiver of the intellectual property rights at the World Trade Organization. The African Union has also supported it, but some countries are continuing to block it, but negotiations are still ongoing. So does anyone from the audience have any questions for our panelists? If not, I'll wait for the questions to come in. As you state which country you're from and who you are, I'd like to ask the panelists if they have any parting shot or what they feel is the way forward in terms of Africa unlocking its potential to be able to produce a COVID-19 vaccine. I'll start with you, Dr. Mehdi.
Yeah, as I said before, there is 3 pillars. For me, starting from the beginning, it is the learning curve, having the good people, having well-educated people, well-trained people. This is a key. Even if we have at some period of time, if we have to have expats sitting with us in order to speed up the process. The second point is really to do not work in silos, but having in the same room all the organizations and people, more than organization people, who are able to do it and to make it happen. In order to perhaps share the experiences, and even more than that, if we can share the process of manufacturing. Perhaps that in South Africa they are more advanced, they can produce the raw material and then spread this raw material in several plants in regions in Africa in order to fill and finish make the mixture, culture, and all the rest of process. We can imagine we have to think out of the box today. The situation is complex, and we should think out of the box, meaning that we don't have to make the same mistake. It will not be a solution with one actor. I believe, and I strongly believe, that it will be a solution with the whole African actors.
Before I come to you, Alain and Professor Petro, Chiko Sabanda had raised her hand earlier. Do you still have a question for any of the panelists?
I don't think I raised it my by mistake. Thank you.
All right, that's fine. Lane, any parting shot from you?
Yeah, not much. I think it's a bit what I've already said. I think we'll continue from our side putting pressure on Pfizer and BioNTech to share their technology, because we still think that even if the hub is starting its own project, any information and any sharing of knowledge will be very helpful in accelerating the efforts. And as I said, on the other side, we also want to make sure that the IP environment is, but will basically give freedom to operate to the hub and to other companies that are willing to work and invest on the mRNA technology.
What about you, Professor Petro?
2 points. I think certainly this is Africa Incorporated, required for us to really change this very uncomfortable reality we currently have on the continent. There is a long-term vision here, and it has to be in absolute teamwork and with a systems approach. And then maybe just a comment. I do believe we need to build platforms which are vertically integrated. We have to build the best. In building our company, we always say that we will we'll hire the best, we will dream big, and we will scale wisely. I think the same will apply for this initiative in Africa to build the sustainable vaccine manufacturing industry. Thank you very much for a great session.
What about you, Dr. Ningay? Since the Africa CDC has a bird's eye view of everything that's happening around the continent, what would be your parting shot in terms of letting the audience know the steps that the Africa CDC is taking to ensure that local vaccine production takes place within the continent and the deadline is met by 2040?
Absolutely. Thanks. Let me just take where Prof. Petro just left. Our vision is very clear, and there are 3 keywords there. Public health security, we can't compromise with that. A sustainable vaccines development. We don't just want to put all our effort on COVID-19 for now. I think that's going to be a risky business. And then lastly, really be sure that we really have a reliable manufacturing ecosystem in Africa. There are 2 things. We all know that success is measured at least 10% will be strategy and 90% execution. So if we get to that and we're sure that Petro can crack that code, we're sure that's definitely going to be a success for all of us. I think we're going to get there by 2040. We've identified the bottlenecks, and we're working towards that. As I've said, we're going to release our framework for action in the next coming weeks, and then we'll also start at highest level of the continent dissemination, syndicating, to be sure that we have a buy-in for the entire continent on our head of state. I think that's a strong message we can send, and we're fully supportive to all those initiatives, the private sector, public sector, to ensure that even academia, to ensure that we get to 2040. It's a long journey, but the journey actually started a couple of months already. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much to all our panelists, Dr. Mehdi, Professor Petro, Alain, and Dr. Nikes, for joining us and shedding more light